All right, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your gracious, humble, and today spooky host, Richie Mars. And happy Halloween, one and all. Hope you had some great plans over the weekend and have a fantastic Halloween, giving out candy, eating some candy. Yeah, candy. It's one of those days I'm recording this. So, a lot of good things that are coming up right here, but today is especially special because we are talking about the famous WCW Halloween Havoc match of Rey Mysterio against Eddie Guerrero. Rey Mysterio's mask versus Eddie Guerrero's Cruiserweight Championship. We're going to go into all the backstory, the match itself, and so much more. But I will thank you right now for listening right here. Again, you could follow us on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, Instagram and TikTok at Retold Richie Mars. I got actually followed by Big Vito the other day from WCW fame. So thank you very much, Mr. Vito. So, how did we get here in the WCW Cruiserweight Championship match at Halloween Havoc? Well, as most of you may know, some of you may not, so let me go into the little bit of a backstory. The cruiserweights in WCW were used, as Eric Bischoff would say, who was the president at the time for WCW. They were the car crashes for WCW Nitro. They were there prior to the second hour to keep the energy flowing throughout the show. But that was all that was planned for them. There was no plan for them to move up the card. There was no plan for advanced placement, so to speak. Like, if you were in the Cruiserweight division, there were never going to be plans for you to be in a World Heavyweight Championship match as a serious contender. Now, how does this relate to Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio? So, Eddie was one of the first waves to leave ECW to WCW and be a part of this Cruiserweight division. He bounced around between the U.S. title scene, and then he found a nice little niche in the Cruiserweight Championship scene where he flourished as the main heel, main bad guy of that division. A lot of people, I know Chris Jericho mentioned this in his book, that he later kind of retracted this statement, but that the WCW Cruiserweight Championship was almost like a dirty word within WCW, and it meant as much as a belt from JCPenney. I believe he later retracted those statements, but the story is the WCW Cruiserweight Championship wasn't meant with any seriousness. So that's how most of the people of the division looked at it. Eddie Guerrero looked at it at a completely different way. He loved the style of the Cruiserweight division. He liked the feel of the Cruiserweight division. And he really did make that Cruiserweight division his own. And you could see that when he turned heel in WCW, because he came in as a babyface, had a run with the U.S. title, and then when he came back from, I believe he tore his pec against Dean Malenko, he came back, cost Dean Malenko a match, and then turned full heel, full bad guy, and this is probably peak Eddie Guerrero in '97. He was just cut, shredded. If you've seen this match at Halloween Havoc, he probably had his best look with the mullet, the gold and black half tight look with the red trim. It just looked amazing. And Eddie Guerrero was really great at having the crowd hate him. And let me tell you, they weren't piping any boos for Eddie. Eddie got legitimate heat, and it astounds me that WCW didn't really plan on capitalizing this. But in Eric Bischoff's mindset, which I think he admitted to, he looks at wrestling more as a TV producer standpoint than a creative standpoint, because he wasn't really in charge of creative per se. He was a decision maker, but it was pretty much the end decision, and anything that was creative, people had to figure out in between. I believe Kevin Sullivan was the booker at the time, so he would probably be the one handling the decisions. I think Terry Taylor was also a part of it, but I could be wrong. So, we have that part, and let's get back to Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio is now a legendary professional wrestler. Went into the Hall of Fame this year. We even talked about his first one with the World Championship here. You could look back in the archives and check it out. But Rey Mysterio was something of a growing sensation. He was very small, but the moves he did in the ring were just out of this world. Chris Jericho also said in his book that Rey Mysterio was kind of like a Jackie Chan kind of performer, where he was so magnetic, he was so creative and so outside the box that he just made every fight he was in believable. There was a story, I think this was in Wrestling and Romance, WAR, that promotion in Japan, where Rey Mysterio came in for the first time and the promoter was kind of like, I don't know, he's kind of small, I don't think he could hang with the big boys. And then Rey Mysterio went out and had his match with Psychosis, and that same promoter was like, oh yeah, when can we have Rey Mysterio back? So Rey Mysterio proved to a lot of people that he was a legit sensation, a legit superstar. And when he came into WCW from ECW, debuting on pay-per-view, the Great American Bash pay-per-view in 96, he took everybody by surprise. I know a lot of people were kind of, hesitant because you look at Rey Mysterio, you don't really think much of it, because I believe he was billed as 5'6", but he was more like 5'2", 5'3" maybe, and probably 150 pounds, 145 pounds. So you're not really going to say, like, oh, okay, how is he going to be treated seriously? But then you see him in the ring, and he performs like how he performs, and it just changes everybody's mind on an instant, which gives him an extreme edge of being a certified crowd favorite. Which brings us to WCW Halloween Havoc 97 and a title versus mask match. These are super big in Lucha Libre, and the mask in that culture, in the Lucha Libre culture, is so important. A mask is basically your identity. It is your superpower. It is your superhero persona mask, and there have been careers when you're unmasked that haven't been the same after you unmask. There's almost like you have two careers you have to differentiate between. There's the masked career, and then there's the unmasked career. And you're not sure when people see your face if that's how they will perceive you the same way again. And with Rey Mysterio, he's been in this company for a little over a year at this point, and Eric Bischoff said that he decided to make the decision to remove Rey Mysterio's mask. And Rey Mysterio was very hesitant about this. In fact, don't just take my word for it. Let's take Rey Mysterio's word for it. This comes from his 2009 autobiography, Rey Mysterio, Behind the Mask. My worst confrontation with WCW's management happened later that year, when rumors started going around that I was going to lose my mask. The rumors turned into a confrontation, though it was weeks before anyone actually approached me about it. I'm not sure where the idea came from. I think Scott Hall said something along the lines of, hey, he's a good-looking guy. Man, why is he wrestling with the mask? Take his mask off. You should have him in commercials. It's a story I heard from various sources. If true, I'm sure he thought it was a compliment. Nobody calls you good-looking because they're trying to put you down. And I was getting along with Scott and Kevin Nash, hang out with them, so I have no reason to think it was meant in a bad way. Or do I? Anyway, the rumors started to spread. I don't know if Eric had the idea himself at one point. He wasn't the one booking the shows, which was wrestling terminology for writing the storylines, though he could have been a direct involved in the decision. The match was scheduled between me and Eddie Guerrero for Halloween Havoc in 97. Eddie had the title, and the match was billed as the contest between Eddie's title and my mask. He loses, I get the title. I lose, I take off my mask. Somehow I heard that I was going to lose. It would mean my mask. I didn't believe it at first. Then sure enough, I got word from a reliable source. That source was Kevin Nash. Kevin was my friend, and I didn't make any secret of how I felt about it. So, a couple of things here. One, it just kind of shows the political climate at the time for WCW and how I don't think mismanages is the right word. It's just kind of like how communication was broken down. Just hearing rumors of like, hey, you're going to have this dramatic character shift without anybody actually confronting you or talking to you about it. And then everything just kind of goes helter-skelter a little bit with speculation. And you could see Rey right here. He was kind of paranoid about, losing the mask in such a way when he wasn't prepared to lose, because in the Lucha Libre culture, they make a really big deal out of it. And we're going to get to Eric Bischoff's side in a bit, but we're going to finish up with Rey's side right here and what Eric told him when he decided he wasn't going to show up. When Kevin told me about it, I told him I wasn't going to do it. He was pretty sympathetic. He agreed I shouldn't go. Tell him you're hurt, he said. Tell him you can't wrestle. Get a note from your doctor and don't show up. Then you have a legitimate excuse. I decided to take his advice. Well, the word got back to Eric somehow. Who told him? I don't know. Somebody stooged me off. I hope it wasn't Kevin, though. The timing of what happened next made it seem like one pretty big coincidence if he didn't. Eric called me at my home on Friday, the day before I was supposed to leave for Vegas and get ready for the pay-per-view, which was on Sunday. I think it was the first time Eric ever called me. Certainly there. I never picked up my phone at home, but that day I happened to. Eric said hello. Hey Eric, how you doing? I heard you're not going to be at Halloween Havoc. Well, that is my plan. I just want to let you know if you don't show up, you're in breach of contract and I will fire you. Wait, hold on. You want to take off my mask and I'm not cool with that. You're going to do what you're told and you have nothing to say about that. You better show up and you better be there for the pay-per-view. Well, what if I don't show up? You just better show up. That conversation is still burned in my memory. He was pissed off, which, looking back, is kind of funny because I was the one who should have been pissed off. So after this, Rey Mysterio would talk to Kevin Nash and ask him honestly what his chances were for him to go to the WWE at that time. Kevin Nash said it wasn't very likely, so Rey was kind of boxed in. And then he saw Eric Bischoff the next day, and he said, "You ready for tomorrow?" And Rey said, "Yeah, well, I'm here." And he said, "Good." No other further explanation, just good. Eddie knew what was going on, and Eddie said not to worry about it, and that's what happened. But let's not just look at Rey's side. Let's look at Eric Bischoff's side, because, there's always three sides to a story. One side, the other side, and the truth. This comes from his autobiography, Controversy Creates Cash, and ironically, both Rey Mysterio and Eric Bischoff's autobiographies had the same, I'm not sure if ghostwriter is the word, but the same writer that helped with the process, Jeremy Roberts. This is what Eric Bischoff had to say about Rey Mysterio's mask. The mask became a big issue for Rey Mysterio. I wanted Rey to be a character that kids could relate to. He had a lot of characteristics going for him, but he wore a mask, and the camera couldn't see his facial expressions, the expressions to tell the story. After Rey had been with us for quite some time, I knew his character could grow. Rey's a good-looking guy, and I thought taking the mask off would take him to the next level, make him a real superstar. But Rey, having been brought up in Mexico and having a different feel about the heritage of his character, balked. Not having grown up in Mexico, I didn't really understand it. I do now, but that said, I still think Rey was better off without the mask. Rey's argument was, wait a minute, in Mexico that was who I am. And I said, yeah, but you're not in Mexico anymore, so guess what? You're going to lose the mask. I actually tried to be more diplomatic than that, but it came down to the push, come to shove. I had to stand my ground. He lost the mask in a hair versus mask match at Super Brawl 9 when Mysterio and Conan were defeated by Nash and Hall. But losing the mask was hard on Rey. He didn't really embrace it. These days, he wrestles with it on in WWE. So, on the one hand, I kinda see where Bischoff is coming from. The mask usually blocks from any facial expression that you're trying to tell a story with your face while you're in the ring selling. Like selling pain, selling an injury, anything like that. So sometimes the mask can be almost like a shield that just blocks you from communicating with the audience in that way. That being said, though, Rey Mysterio is probably one of the only luchadors who has that selling with the mask on his face down to a science. You are in belief that Rey Mysterio is in pain when he's in those matches. I don't think the mask covered him up emotionally. As a matter of fact, it made it seem like he was more different than the rest of the roster because you could tell his facial expressions by that mask, even though majority of it was covered. You could tell it by his mouth, his eyes. You know, his eyes tell the story a lot of the times. And even his career in WWE, its proof is in the pudding right there that Rey Mysterio can tell a story and have the crowd behind him just by the longevity and the popularity of his career. And just think about just the merchandising of masks that WWE made over the year. And Rey Mysterio even sold his masks, and I know he made a fortune off them. So taking away the mask, like in practice, I understand what Bischoff was saying, but as an advertisement standpoint, as a superhero standpoint, I just think it was a major mistake to try to get the mask off Rey Mysterio. Because if he were to lose a mask, he would kind of just be like every other guy. And a lot of people say Rey Mysterio without the mask is just, he just looks like a giant kid. You know what I mean? And in my opinion, this was probably one of the big snafus Bischoff had as president of WCW, taking all the masks away from the luchadors. Like I know Juventud Guerrero lost his masks to Chris Jericho a little bit before this, I believe, or a little bit after this. And trying to make them a bigger star, yeah, you could do that, but the problem was WCW wouldn't elevate them in a certain spot. Rey Mysterio was always going to be that cruiserweight guy from then till WCW closed. So removing the mask didn't really elevate him as a star, really. So just my 2 cents on it. I understand what Bischoff was kind of going for, but again, it could have been a little bit more thought out. At least he has a better understanding of the Lucha Libre culture and why the mask is so important and why you can't just lose the mask willy-nilly. But I get it. He was looking at it from a television standpoint, probably not from a marketing standpoint, because he probably wasn't focused on making money with merchandise. He was probably focused on making money through television. So that's why I don't think people selling the masks at WCW shows was a big thing at that point. And I know Kevin Nash even said that the royalty system from WCW and between that and WWE is night and day, with WWE having like a breakdown of all your merchandise, where WCW, you wouldn't even know if you had any merchandise. I know there was a story with Chris Jericho. His girlfriend, now wife at the time, bought a Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko 2-pack action figure set. The cashier scanned it, and it showed up as a Hulk Hogan Sting 2-pack, which means that Hulk Hogan and Sting would have gotten the revenue money, and not Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko. So, again, it's one of those things where, well, they need to pay for these contracts somehow. So, there you go. But again, we have another side to the story. We have Eddie Guerrero's side. Let's see what Eddie Guerrero has to say. And this comes from his book of Cheating Death, Stealing Life, the Eddie Guerrero story. When we were told about how the angle would play out that night, we tried to explain that taking off Rey's mask should be something special. The agents listened, told us they appreciated our input, and then said that we should do what we were told. We were like puppets. Bischoff got into his head at the time, had come to unmask Rey Mysterio and book us in a title versus mask match at Halloween Havoc at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. It's a huge deal when a Mexican wrestler loses his mask. It's like losing your identity. Because it represents a major career milestone, wrestlers usually make a lot of money for losing their mask. Rey argued that if he was going to sacrifice his mask, he would want to get his payoff. Give me a chance to lose it in TJ, which is Tijuana, he asked Bischoff. But Bischoff didn't care. He didn't give a beep about the heritage of the mask. He just wanted to do what he wanted to do. It's almost as if he was doing it just to show his power. Like, you're going to lose your mask because I say you're going to lose that mask. The afternoon of the show, Rey came to me and said he was going to try one more time to change Eric's mind. Will you support me on this, he asked. I knew how upsetting this was to Rey. I understood the value of the mask and didn't want to see him screwed out of his payoff. Of course, bro, I said. You know I'll always stand behind you. I don't know what was said behind closed doors, but before the show time, Terry Taylor pulled me aside. Hey man, he said, I know we've been building to something different, but do you mind doing the job for Rey? I didn't have a problem with it. I knew letting him take my cruiserweight title was the right thing to do. I did, however, get insulted when I was told we were going to be the first match. Rey and I were too good to be jerking the curtain. Okay, I thought, that's how you feel about us? We'll give you something to follow. When the time finally came to go out and wrestle, I was completely motivated. I wanted to tear the house down. For Rey and myself, I wanted to prove that we were just more than filler. Rey, and this is what happened after the match, because that match was phenomenal. They did a couple of insane movements even to this day. Rey Mysterio hit Eddie Guerrero with a backflip DDT, which I know was the only time they hit that move, but they hit it tonight, and they always tried to replicate it, but for some reason or other, it just didn't work, and it was phenomenal. You had Rey do a 619 into a head scissors. You had him do a plancha Hurricane Rana over the top rope. And Eddie, just psychology-wise, was so on top of his game during this point. And it's amazing that WCW didn't see him as a higher priority or star, because he could generate heat and he could put on a performance of a lifetime such as this. So this is after the match. Rey and I knew we had ripped it up out there. But when we went to the back, there was hardly any reaction from the rest of the boys. A few of our friends came over and patted us on the back and to say, good match. But that was it. For the most part, everyone was quiet and didn't say anything to us. That just confirmed it in my mind. Nothing says success quite like having the top boys refuse to acknowledge you. So there you go. You know what I mean? It's, back then it was a very, I don't want to say thankless business, but it's like, for the people who look at wrestling like an art style, like you had so many cruiserweights do, have put a lot of pride in their in-ring work. It's almost a little bit of a badge of honor to say like, hey, follow that. But also you got to feel like kind of like the top guy's not recognizing you and being kind of pissed that you stole the show. That shows they have to work even harder. And then it's like, oh, great, I have to work even harder to win the crowd. Good. You should be trying to work harder. You should be trying to put pride in your work. But a lot of people in WCW, they were getting those big money contracts. So they were fine with kind of just phoning it in and just getting paid. And this is what Eddie Guerrero has to say about the placement of him and Rey Mysterio post Halloween Havoc. Unfortunately, there's a lot of more to the business than just having a good match. Even though we proved at Halloween Havoc that we could tear it up with the best of them, it did nothing to elevate us in the eyes of the company. And there you go. That's what happens when, even though you have the greatest match possibly of all of WCW, it was recognized by the fans. It's living on infamy right now. You could go on YouTube and watch the match. But at that time, WCW just didn't care. They didn't care about the mask. They didn't care about their car crashes, because that's what they thought they were, action scenes. They didn't think they needed to be developed or interact with the top part of the card. I know Chris Jericho also said that WCW was kind of like a caste system. Whatever role you were meant to be in, that's the role you were in. No questions asked. But in the fans' perspective, I think a lot of us like when performers are put in different scenarios and situations to see how they sink or swim. And with Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio in this match, they swam all right. They did more than swim. They were doing like backstrokes, and they were doing different dives and butterflies. They were doing everything. So this is personally one of my favorite matches. This was actually the first WCW match I watched, so everything after that was all downhill from there. And this match, just psychology-wise, just Eddie Guerrero trying to get the mask. And I was surprised because I didn't notice this from my viewings beforehand. There were 4 commentators on this match. There's Tony Schiavone, there's Bobby Heenan, there's Mike Tenay, and there's Dusty Rhodes. So you get a little bit of everything. But the thing is, they didn't all like talk over each other, try to get a word in. They all felt seamlessly into place. They all had their roles in this match to make it even more so. And it's just really cool how this match kind of lives in infamy. I know Seth Rollins wore a similar gear to this at SummerSlam when he faced Dominic Mysterio at SummerSlam to Rey Mysterio's Phantom attire right there. Rey Mysterio had like the Phantom bodysuit and everything. And Eddie Guerrero, like I said, his outfit here is legendary. And even Dominic Mysterio has like a cool little fusion going on with his attire. Like he's kind of like takes some inspiration from the Halloween Havoc attire that Rey Mysterio has, and he has that sweet mullet that Eddie had in this match. So Dominic Mysterio kind of looks like a perfect fusion between the two. But that is it. That is the behind-the-scenes tale of Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero on Halloween Havoc. The good, the bad, the weird. And I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Again, you could follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and the TikTok at Retold Richie Mars. And again, new episodes every Tuesday. My name is Richie Mars, TTFN, Tata for now. Have a happy and safe Halloween, and I will see you next time.